They sold my parking spot again. I stared at the cherry red Corvette sitting in space 23B, my space, and felt something inside me transform, like I'd been reborn into this moment countless times before. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the leather grip creaking under the pressure. No, I whispered, closing my eyes. Not again. The familiar rage bubbled up inside me like hot tar, thick and suffocating. This was the third time this year, the third time despite my complaints, documentation, and the crystal clear terms of my lease agreement. The scent of exhaust fumes from the underground garage filled my nostrils as I sat there, engine idling, with nowhere to park in the building I called home. I knew that car. Everyone in the building did. It belonged to the nephew of Mr. Galloway, our building's owner, a 20-something trust fund baby who visited occasionally to flaunt his wealth and connections. He didn't even live here. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Interview Larson Media 2 p.m. My stomach dropped. I had exactly 40 minutes to park, change, and make it downtown. The interview I'd spent weeks preparing for, the one that could finally launch me from freelance designer to creative director. The memory hit me with startling clarity. In my previous life, this exact scenario had unfolded with devastating consequences. I'd spent 30 minutes searching for street parking, arrived at the interview sweaty and flustered, and watched my dream job slip through my fingers. That failure had cascaded into 6 more months of financial struggle, eventually forcing me to give up my apartment entirely. But not this time. This time I remembered everything. I pulled into a guest spot, knowing it would earn me a warning from management, and marched toward the elevator. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows as I punched the button for the lobby with more force than necessary. Marcus, our building manager, stood behind the front desk, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. Everything about him screamed mediocrity disguised as competence, from his discount department store suit to his slicked-back hair that never quite managed to cover the thinning spots. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the desk. "Someone's parked in my assigned space again." He glanced up, his expression barely concealing his annoyance. "Good afternoon to you too, Miss Chen." "It's the red Corvette, in my spot, again." Marcus sighed dramatically. "I believe that vehicle belongs to Mr. Galloway's nephew. He's a special guest." "A special guest who's in my contracted parking space," I countered, feeling my pulse quicken. "I have an important meeting and I need my spot, now." "Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do at the moment." He straightened his posture, attempting to project authority. "Mr. Galloway has instructed us to accommodate his nephew whenever he visits. Perhaps you could use street parking just for today." The dismissive smile he gave me sent a surge of déjà vu through my body. I'd seen that exact smile before in my previous life, the one where I'd meekly accepted his non-solution and walked away defeated. As he turned to assist another resident, the overpowering scent of his cologne lingered in the air, a cheap imitation of something expensive that burned my nostrils and left a sickly sweet taste in the back of my throat. In my past life, I'd choked on that smell while swallowing my objections. "This isn't acceptable," I said, my voice eerily calm even to my own ears. "My lease explicitly states that spot 23B is assigned to Unit 512, my apartment. I've documented the previous 2 incidents. This is the 3rd violation this year." His smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the acquiescent response he expected. "Like I said, Miss Chen, there's nothing I can do right now. You're welcome to send an email to management, and we'll address your concerns when Mr. Galloway's nephew departs." I nodded slowly, watching his shoulders relax as he assumed victory. The old me would have left. The reborn me knew better. I walked out the front entrance, the cool autumn air a refreshing change from the stifling atmosphere of the lobby. Instead of heading for street parking, I circled back to the garage entrance. Standing just inside the gate, I took out my phone and snapped several photos of the red Corvette in my space, making sure to capture the space number and the vehicle's license plate. I noticed a security camera in the corner and positioned myself clearly in its view while documenting the violation. The cool metal of my phone felt reassuring in my hand as I remembered what was coming. In my previous life, this parking incident had been just the beginning, the first in a series of small injustices that had snowballed into my eventual financial ruin. Not this time. This time I had knowledge, and knowledge was power. I hurried back to my car, changed into my interview clothes, and called a rideshare. I'd make it to the interview with minutes to spare. As I slid into the back seat of the car, I felt oddly serene. The ticking seconds of the driver's dashboard clock reminded me that time was now my ally, not my enemy. "Larson Media downtown, please," I said to the driver, "and I'm in a bit of a hurry." As the car pulled away from my building, I took one last look at the gleaming glass facade. Something deep inside me shifted, a quiet promise forming. One day, I thought, this place will be mine, and everyone who's wronged me will remember the day they crossed Alexandra Chen. 2 weeks after the parking incident, I returned home from a successful follow-up meeting with Larson Media to find an envelope taped to my door. The paper crinkled under my fingers as I tore it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the empty hallway. My eyes scanned the notice, a chill spreading through my body despite the stuffy air of the corridor. Notice of rent adjustment. Effective next month, my rent would increase by 15%. I stumbled into my apartment, the door slamming behind me with a hollow thud that matched the emptiness forming in my stomach. This wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. My lease clearly stated a maximum annual increase of 3%, and I wasn't due for renewal for another 4 months. I sank onto my couch, the familiar fabric rough against my fingertips as I clutched the notice. In my previous life, I'd received an identical letter. I'd been caught off guard then, scrambling to make ends meet and eventually taking on credit card debt that spiraled out of control. But in this life, rage replaced panic. I knew exactly what this was: retaliation. Someone, Marcus most likely, had connected my formal complaint about the parking violation to Mr. Galloway, and now they were sending a message. The next morning, I marched into the leasing office, notice in hand. The stuffy air inside the windowless room seemed to press against my skin, making it difficult to breathe. Marcus sat behind his desk, that same condescending smile plastered on his face when he saw me enter. "Miss Chen, what can I do for you today?" he asked, his voice dripping with false politeness. I slapped the notice onto his desk. "You can explain this illegal rent increase." He barely glanced at the paper. "Ah, yes. Due to increasing maintenance costs and property taxes, Mr. Galloway has authorized a special assessment for certain units." "Certain units?" I repeated. "My lease specifically limits increases to 3% annually. This is 15% with no warning." Marcus leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. "If you look at Section 22B of your lease agreement, you'll see that management reserves the right to adjust rents in response to significant property improvements or tax reassessments." I narrowed my eyes. "What property improvements?" "We're upgrading the security system and renovating the main lobby," he replied smoothly. "All for the benefit of our residents, of course." The lie hung between us like a tangible thing. I'd read every word of my lease, twice in this life, once in my previous one. There was no such clause that would allow for this kind of increase. "I'd like a copy of my lease agreement," I said, "the one you have on file." A flicker of unease crossed his face before he nodded. "Certainly, I'll have to locate it in our system. Can you come back tomorrow?" "I'll wait." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm afraid I have appointments all morning." "I'll wait," I repeated, settling into the chair across from his desk. The clock on the wall ticked loudly as we stared at each other. Finally, he sighed and turned to his computer. The rhythmic clicking of his keyboard filled the silence as I watched him navigate through several screens, his brow furrowing slightly. After several minutes, he printed a document and handed it to me with a flourish. "Here you are, Miss Chen." The paper felt warm in my hands, fresh from the printer. I flipped through it slowly, my heart racing as I reached page 15. There it was. A clause that hadn't existed in my original lease, expertly inserted as if it had always been there. The font matched perfectly. If I hadn't known better, even I might have believed it was legitimate. "This isn't the lease I signed," I said quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting we falsified legal documents, Miss Chen? That's a serious accusation." "I have my original copy at home," I bluffed. In truth, I'd lost it during my move, something I knew Marcus was counting on. Most tenants didn't keep their paperwork, a fact that management exploited frequently. His smile never wavered, but something hardened in his eyes. Feel free to review your copy then. But I assure you, this is the agreement on file. The rent increase stands. I folded the fraudulent document and tucked it into my bag, my fingers trembling slightly, not with fear, but with calculated rage. We'll see about that. That evening, I received an email about an emergency tenant meeting scheduled for the following day. The timing wasn't coincidental. I knew exactly what was coming. The community room buzzed with nervous energy as residents filtered in. The harsh fluorescent lighting cast everyone in an unflattering glow, highlighting worried expressions and furrowed brows. I took a seat near the back, watching as Marcus and a young woman I recognized as Emma Galloway, the owner's daughter, arranged themselves at the front of the room. Emma Galloway embodied every stereotype of inherited wealth. Her designer clothes hung perfectly on her slender frame, and her carefully highlighted hair fell in artful waves around her shoulders. She surveyed the room with the detached interest of someone observing animals in a zoo. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began once the room had filled. "As you know, Galloway Properties is committed to providing the highest quality living experience." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. "However," he continued, raising his voice slightly, "maintaining such standards requires occasional adjustments. Miss Galloway is here to discuss some exciting changes coming to the building." Emma stepped forward, her heels clicking against the tile floor. "We're thrilled to announce a comprehensive modernization project that will transform this building into a premier luxury residence." The knot in my stomach tightened. I'd heard this exact speech before. "What about the rent increases?" called out Mr. Patel from the third floor. 15% is too much." Emma's perfect smile didn't falter. "The increases reflect the enhanced value these improvements will bring to your living experience." I stood up, feeling dozens of eyes turned toward me. "What about the terms of our existing leases? Many of us have clauses limiting annual increases." Emma's gaze settled on me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And you are?" "Alexandra Chen, Unit 512. Recognition flickered across her face. I knew Marcus had mentioned me to the Galloways. "Miss Chen," she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold, "perhaps you're unaware of the special assessment clause in your agreement. It's quite standard in rental contracts." "It wasn't in the original lease I signed," I replied. The room grew quieter as other residents leaned forward. "Are you suggesting my family's company engages in fraudulent practices?" Emma asked, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Because that's a serious allegation that could be considered defamation. I'm suggesting that residents should compare their original leases with the versions suddenly on file." Emma laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "Everyone, Miss Chen here, seems to think she's a legal expert. I assure you, Galloway Properties operates with the utmost integrity. If anyone has concerns about their individual situation, please schedule a private appointment rather than disrupting this informational session." She turned to Marcus. "Perhaps we should continue with the presentation?" As Marcus fumbled with his laptop, Emma glanced back at me, her expression making it clear. I'd just made a powerful enemy. The meeting continued, but I barely heard the details of their luxury upgrades. My mind was racing, calculating. The first of the month was just 10 days away. The rent increase would force many residents to dip into savings or take on debt. Some would have to move. In my previous life, I'd been among them, starting a downward spiral I couldn't escape. After the meeting, I attempted to rally some of the other residents in the lobby, but they drifted away, avoiding eye contact. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the Galloways knew exactly how to wield it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the harsh light of my laptop illuminating my determined expression. I pulled up my financial records and began to plan. In my previous life, I'd wasted months fighting a battle I couldn't win with the resources I had. This time would be different. I logged into my investment account, something I hadn't possessed in my previous life, and navigated to a small tech startup called Neurasite. In my past life, I'd watched from the sidelines as this unknown company revolutionized facial recognition technology and saw its stock value increase by 4,000% within 18 months. Now, I had the chance to be part of that growth. The cool plastic of my credit card felt like possibility against my fingertips as I entered the numbers, investing nearly all my savings. The transaction confirmation glowed on the screen, the soft ping signaling completion sending a shiver of anticipation down my spine. This was my first countermove, quiet, private, and completely invisible to the Galloways. Knowledge from my past life was my secret weapon. While they thought they were breaking me, I was already several moves ahead in a game they didn't even know we were playing. The next day, I noticed a new security camera in the hallway outside my apartment, angled directly at my door. The black dome gleamed under the hallway lights, its small red light blinking steadily like a mechanical heartbeat, another intimidation tactic. I smiled and waved at it as I left for work, projecting the image of someone cowed but trying to make the best of things. Inside, I was already cataloging this as another violation, another piece of evidence for a future they couldn't imagine. That evening, I systematically photographed every maintenance issue in the building: the cracked tiles in the lobby, the constantly flickering lights in the stairwell, the mold growing in the corner of the laundry room. I documented the date the elevator inspection had expired, the emergency exit that had been blocked with maintenance equipment for weeks. As I built my dossier of violations, I felt strangely calm. The ticking clock of the next rent payment no longer filled me with dread. Instead, it marked the countdown to a future only I could see, one where the tables would turn so completely that Marcus and the Galloways wouldn't know what hit them. 3 weeks after the tenant meeting, I returned home to find water seeping under my front door. The sight sent a jolt of recognition through me. This had happened before in my previous life. I fumbled with my keys, the metal cool and slippery in my trembling hands, and pushed the door open. Water covered the entryway floor, soaking into the carpet with a sickening squelch beneath my shoes. The unmistakable musty smell of dampness hung in the air, already beginning to turn stale and moldy. I followed the trail to my bathroom, where water poured from the ceiling, directly above where maintenance had supposedly fixed a leak last week. I closed the bathroom door to contain the flood and immediately called the emergency maintenance line. The phone rang 6 times before Marcus answered, his voice artificially concerned. "Alexandra, what seems to be the problem?" I noticed he'd dropped the formal, Miss Chen," a subtle way of diminishing me. "My ceiling is leaking," I said evenly, suppressing the urge to scream. "There's water everywhere. The carpet is soaked." "Oh dear," he replied, not sounding surprised at all. "Must be from the routine plumbing work we're doing in the unit above you. We sent a notice about potential disruptions." No such notice had ever arrived. I was certain of it. "I need someone here now," I insisted. "The water damage is getting worse by the minute." "I'll see if anyone's available," Marcus said. "But it's after hours, so it might be tomorrow morning before—" "This is an emergency," I cut him off. "My lease guarantees emergency maintenance services." He sighed dramatically, the sound crackling through the phone speaker. "I'll see what I can do." 2 hours later, a maintenance worker named Ray showed up with a wet vacuum and industrial fan. He worked silently, the loud mechanical drone of the vacuum filling my apartment as it sucked up water from the carpet. The ceiling had stopped leaking, but a large water stain spread across the bathroom ceiling like a dark, ominous cloud. "Will someone be coming to fix the ceiling?" I asked as Ray prepared to leave. He avoided eye contact. "I just handle the water extraction. You'll need to submit a separate maintenance request for the ceiling repair." "But this was their mistake," I protested. "The damage was caused by maintenance work upstairs." Ray shrugged, uncomfortable. "I just do what they tell me, ma'am. Sorry." After he left, I stood in my damp apartment, the industrial fan creating a constant hum that vibrated through my bones. The carpet squished unpleasantly under my feet, and already I could detect the faintest hint of mildew beginning to form. This accident would make my apartment increasingly unpleasant to live in. In my previous life, this water damage had never been properly repaired. The ceiling had been hastily painted over, but mold had developed, eventually causing me respiratory problems that added medical bills to my mounting financial troubles. The carpet had remained damp for weeks, developing a persistent musty smell that no amount of air freshener could mask. I submitted an online maintenance request for the ceiling repair, attaching photos of the damage. The confirmation email stated someone would assess the situation within 7-10 business days. I knew exactly what would happen. They were hoping I'd give up and leave, making room for a new tenant who would pay the higher rent without complaint. 3 days later, Marcus himself appeared at my door with a maintenance worker I didn't recognize. The sharp chemical smell of bleach emanated from the bucket the worker carried, making my eyes water slightly. "We're here about your ceiling," Marcus announced, his cologne once again overpowering in the confined space of my doorway. I stepped aside to let them enter, noting how Marcus's eyes darted around my apartment, assessing. "The damage is extensive," I said. "The carpet is still damp, and I'm concerned about mold." The maintenance worker barely glanced at the ceiling before turning to Marcus. "Quick paint job should cover it." Marcus nodded. "Excellent. Let's get that done today." "Paint won't fix the underlying water damage," I objected. "The drywall needs to be replaced, and the carpet needs professional cleaning or replacement." Marcus smiled his practiced smile. "Our assessment indicates a cosmetic solution is sufficient. We'll have this painted today, and that should resolve the issue." I stood my ground. "I've documented the extent of the damage. Painting over water-damaged drywall will lead to mold growth. That's a health code violation." Something flashed in Marcus's eyes, annoyance perhaps, or surprise that I knew my rights. My previous self wouldn't have known to fight this battle? "Fine," he conceded after a moment. "We'll schedule a more comprehensive repair, but it could take several weeks to coordinate." "I understand," I said calmly. "In the meantime, I'll need a rent adjustment for the uninhabitable condition of the apartment." This caught him off guard. That won't be necessary. The apartment is perfectly habitable. The carpet is soaked, the bathroom ceiling is damaged, and there's a risk of mold. I'd be happy to have a housing inspector make that determination if you prefer." I watched him calculate his options, the muscle in his jaw twitching slightly. "I'll speak with Miss Galloway about a modest adjustment for this month only," he finally said. "As a courtesy." I nodded, accepting this small victory while silently adding another item to my growing list of documented violations. After they left, I sat down at my computer to check on my Neurosite investment. In just 3 weeks, the stock had already risen 12%, exactly as I'd anticipated. A small smile played on my lips as I calculated the growth trajectory. By this time next year, my initial investment would multiply several times over. The pieces were falling into place. Later that evening, I took the trash to the building's dumpster area. As I approached, I heard voices from around the corner and instinctively slowed my steps. "Have to move faster," Emma Galloway was saying, her voice sharp with impatience. "Every month we delay costs us potential revenue." "The lease conversions are proceeding as quickly as possible," Marcus replied. "But some tenants are being difficult." "You mean that Chen woman?" Emma asked. "The one making noise about her parking space and ceiling?" "Among others, but don't worry, we're making her apartment particularly uncomfortable. The maintenance accidents should convince her to leave voluntarily before her lease is up." I froze, my heart pounding loudly in my ears as bile rose in my throat. They were deliberately targeting me. "Good," Emma said. "Father wants all the long-term leases converted or eliminated by year-end. The luxury remodel can't proceed with tenants paying below market rates." "What about the elderly couple in 310? They've been here since the building opened." Emma's laugh was cold, cutting through the evening air. "They're the priority. That corner unit has the best views. We could get triple their current rent after renovation." "They're on a fixed income," Marcus said, hesitation evident in his voice. "They won't be able to afford even a small increase." "That's not our problem," Emma snapped. "Business is business. If they can't pay market rate, they can find somewhere more appropriate for their budget." I carefully backed away, then approached again, making deliberate noise with my footsteps. The conversation abruptly stopped as I rounded the corner, trash bag in hand. "Oh," I feigned surprise. "Good evening." Emma's eyes narrowed, her expression calculating as she wondered how much I might have heard. Marcus looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Miss Chen," he acknowledged stiffly. I smiled pleasantly as I disposed of my trash, feeling their eyes on my back. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. from controlled fury at their callous plans. The elderly couple they mentioned, the Robertsons, had always been kind to me. Mr. Robertson had helped me carry groceries once when I'd sprained my wrist. That night, I couldn't sleep. The industrial fan continued its relentless drone, but it wasn't the noise keeping me awake. It was the clarity of purpose crystallizing in my mind. This wasn't just about my parking space anymore. It wasn't even about my apartment. The Galloways were systematically forcing out vulnerable residents for profit, destroying a community with no regard for the lives they were upending. In my previous life, I'd been one of those vulnerable residents, forced out, struggling to find new housing with a broken lease on my record. I'd watched the same happen to others, feeling helpless to stop it. But in this life, I had something I hadn't possessed before: foresight and growing financial resources. I opened my laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating my determined expression as I began researching real estate investment groups in the city. The quiet clicking of my keyboard was like a promise. This time, things would end differently. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, selecting a conservative navy suit I'd recently purchased, one that matched the quality of Emma's designer wardrobe. I was no longer playing defense. Today marked the beginning of my counter strategy. I took a taxi to the downtown financial district, the crisp air energizing as I entered the gleaming office building of Westbrook Financial Partners. My appointment was with Diane Westbrook herself, a shrewd investor known for identifying undervalued properties. "So, Miss Chen," Diane said after I'd presented my proposal, "you believe this property is being deliberately mismanaged to force out long-term tenants before a luxury conversion?" "I have documentation," I replied, sliding a folder across her immaculate desk. The heavy cardstock felt substantial between my fingers, professionally printed evidence I'd compiled over weeks. Diane examined the photos, maintenance records, and copied lease agreements. Her eyes widened slightly at the forged lease clause. "This is concerning," she admitted. "But I'm curious, why come to me? Why not pursue legal action?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Legal action would take years and might only result in minor penalties. I'm interested in a more comprehensive solution, which is, I want to buy the building." Diane's eyebrows shot up. "You're not in a financial position to make that kind of purchase." "Not alone," I acknowledged. "But with the right investment partners and my insider knowledge, we could acquire the property before the Galloways complete their conversion. Based on my research, they're over-leveraged and would likely accept a premium offer rather than risk delays in their renovation timeline." "And what would you do with the building if we helped you acquire it?" she asked, studying me carefully. "Maintain it properly, honor existing leases, make reasonable upgrades that don't price out current residents." I paused. "And make a healthy profit by eliminating the waste and mismanagement currently dragging down the property's value." Diane tapped her manicured nails against the folder, considering. "You have insider knowledge but limited capital. What exactly are you bringing to this partnership?" "I have growing investments that will mature significantly over the next 6 months," I said confidently. "And I know exactly when and how to approach the Galloways, information that could save you millions in negotiation." What I didn't tell her was that my Neurosite investment was already outperforming market projections, or that I'd identified 3 other technology investments from my past life that would multiply my capital exponentially in the coming months. After a lengthy discussion of financial projections and potential returns, Diane nodded slowly. "This is unorthodox, but intriguing. Let me present this to my partners. No promises, but we might have something to work with here." As I left her office, I felt the weight of the building keys in my pocket. Not the current keys, but the ones I would one day hold as owner. The metal pressed against my thigh with each step, a tangible reminder of my quiet power move that Marcus and the Galloways would never see coming. 6 months passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of patience and preparation. My ceiling had been repaired with the bare minimum effort, a patch job that already showed signs of water damage from subsequent leaks. The carpet in my apartment never fully dried, developing dark spots of mold that brought a persistent musty smell, like wet newspaper left too long in the rain. I documented everything meticulously, building my case while pretending to be merely annoyed rather than strategic. My investments, meanwhile, had performed exactly as I'd anticipated. Neurosite announced a revolutionary security algorithm that major tech companies scrambled to license, sending their stocks soaring. I sold my shares at precisely the right moment, reinvesting the profits in two other companies I knew would soon announce breakthrough technologies. My financial portfolio grew exponentially, just as it had failed to do in my previous life when I lacked the foreknowledge to make these moves. On a crisp Saturday evening, I found myself at Eloise's, an exclusive restaurant downtown where securing a reservation typically required weeks of advanced planning. The soft amber lighting created an atmosphere of intimate luxury, while the gentle clinking of fine crystal and the hushed murmur of important conversations filled the air. The rich aroma of truffle and aged wine wafted through the space, making my mouth water in anticipation. I wore a designer dress I could never have afforded in my previous life, the silk cool and smooth against my skin. My hair was styled in an elegant updo, and the diamond studs in my ears, small but flawless, caught the light with every movement. I looked like I belonged among the city's elite, which was precisely the point. I'd chosen my timing carefully, knowing from social media that Emma Galloway had standing Saturday reservations at Eloise's. Sure enough, as I lingered at the bar sipping an overpriced martini, I spotted her entering with a group of equally polished friends. My heartbeat quickened as I watched her from the corner of my eye. She moved with the entitled confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Her laugh carried across the room, the same cold cutting sound I'd heard that night by the dumpsters when she dismissed the struggles of elderly tenants. I gave her time to settle at her table and order drinks before making my move. With deliberate casualness, I walked a path that would take me past her table toward the restrooms. As I approached, I paused, as if suddenly recognizing her. Emma Galloway? She looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to confusion, as she tried to place me. The expensive perfume she wore, something French and exclusive, mixed with the scent of the restaurant's signature bread, creating an oddly dissonant combination. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes scanning my designer dress and carefully styled appearance. "Do I know you?" I smiled warmly. "Alexandra Chen from Westbrook Tower." I used the building's official name rather than just calling it the apartment building, subtly establishing myself as someone who understood real estate terminology. Recognition flickered across her face, quickly replaced by surprise as she took in my transformed appearance. The Alexandra Chen she remembered had been a troublesome tenant in modest clothing, not this polished woman in Louboutin. "Oh, of course," she recovered smoothly. "How are you enjoying the building improvements?" "They're certainly ongoing," I replied diplomatically, noting how her friends were now studying me with curious interest. "I actually wanted to thank you. Those maintenance issues in my unit inspired me to explore investment properties myself. Sometimes challenges lead to unexpected opportunities." Emma's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Investment properties? How interesting." I could see her reassessing me, trying to determine if I was merely pretending to have entered her socio-economic circle. "Just small ventures so far," I said modestly, though I recently joined a partnership with Westbrook Financial. Diane sends her regards, by the way. The name drop had its intended effect. Diane Westbrook was well known in their circles as a serious player in commercial real estate. Emma's expression shifted again, this time to cautious respect. "That's impressive," she conceded. "Perhaps you should join us for a drink." I checked my watch, an understated but expensive timepiece that hadn't gone unnoticed. "I'm actually meeting my own party shortly, but I'd love to catch up properly sometime. Real estate development has become something of a passion." I handed her my new business card, heavy cardstock with a subtle embossed logo. The crisp edge pressed against my fingertips as I transferred it to her manicured hand. "Of course," she said, examining the card with poorly concealed interest. "We should definitely connect." I smiled again and continued toward the restroom, feeling her eyes on my back. The encounter had been brief but effective. I'd planted the seed. Emma would mention me to her father, perhaps do some research. They'd discover my connection to Westbrook Financial was real, but they wouldn't yet understand my intentions toward their building. When I returned from the restroom, I joined my actual dinner companions, Diane Westbrook and two of her senior partners. Our table was positioned with a clear view of Emma's group, allowing her to see that my claims weren't empty talk. The territorial display wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. Real estate development was a power game, and I was letting Emma know I had entered the arena. Was that successful? Diane asked quietly as I took my seat. Perfectly, I replied, unfolding my napkin. She'll be making some calls tonight. Diane nodded approvingly. She'd initially been skeptical of my approach, but as my investments had grown and my insights into local development opportunities proved valuable, she'd become a genuine ally. The dinner conversation turned to our actual purpose, finalizing the structure of the investment vehicle we would use to approach Galloway properties. As we discussed cap rates and financing terms, I felt a tickle of satisfaction each time I caught Emma glancing our way. The clicking of her acrylic nails against her phone screen told me she was already searching for information about me. The pieces of my plan were falling into place with a precision that thrilled me. The careful cultivation of a new identity as a serious investor, backed by actual capital and legitimate connections. 2 weeks later, subtle changes began appearing around the building. The lobby directory was updated with a small, under new management notice in the corner. The maintenance staff wore new uniforms with a different company logo. The security guard at the front desk was replaced with someone unfamiliar who asked for ID before allowing visitors to enter. Whispers spread among the residents. Who's buying the building? What happens to our leases? Will the rent go up again? The palpable anxiety in the elevator and hallways reminded me of my previous life, when I'd been on the other side of this uncertainty. Marcus appeared increasingly frazzled, his once pristine dress shirts showing wrinkles, his cologne applied more heavily as if to mask the scent of his growing desperation. I watched him hurrying through the lobby one morning, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with barely controlled panic. Yes, Mr. Galloway, I understand, but they haven't disclosed. He paused, wincing at whatever was being shouted from the other end. Yes, sir, I'm doing everything I can to get information. I smiled to myself as I collected my mail, the crisp envelope sliding against my fingers. The Galloways were scrambling, just as I'd predicted. They'd leveraged themselves heavily for their planned luxury renovation, counting on forcing out long-term tenants like me. Now, with an unknown entity acquiring the building, their financial calculations were in jeopardy. In my apartment, I unsealed a thick envelope from Westbrook Financial, the sound of tearing paper oddly satisfying. Inside was the partnership agreement making me a minority owner in the acquisition entity. My initial investment, grown through careful stock plays, had secured me a 15% stake, small enough to remain behind the scenes, but large enough to have meaningful input on management decisions. The phone rang, startling me. My heart accelerated at the sight of Diane's name on the screen. Alexandra, she said without preamble. The Galloways received our formal offer this morning. I sank into my couch, the fabric rough against my bare arms. What was their response? Initial rejection, as expected, their posturing. The sound of shuffling papers came through the line. But their lender called Mark separately. They're over-leveraged, just as you predicted. They need to sell within 60 days or the bank will call their development loan. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. The ticking of my wall clock seemed to accelerate, counting down the Galloways' remaining time. So we wait. We wait, Diane confirmed, though I must say your intelligence on their financial position was impressively accurate. I smiled to myself. Let's just say I've been paying very close attention. After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the city skyline. The glass was cool against my palm as I pressed my hand against it. In my previous life, I'd stood at this same window watching the same view, tears streaming down my face as I'd calculated how to afford a broker's fee and security deposit for a new apartment after being forced out. The memory of that helplessness fueled my resolve. 3 days later, Marcus posted notices throughout the building announcing an emergency tenant meeting. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he taped one to the community room door, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. I arrived early to the meeting, selecting a seat near the back where I could observe everything. The room filled quickly, buzzing with speculative conversations. The harsh fluorescent lights cast everyone in a sickly glow, highlighting the worry lines on my neighbors' faces. Mr. and Mrs. Robertson, the elderly couple from Unit 310, sat near the front. Mrs. Robertson clutched her husband's arm, her knuckles white with tension. They'd lived in the building for nearly 30 years. This was their home in every sense of the word. In my previous life, they'd been among the first casualties of the Galloways' redevelopment plan, forced to move to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood after being unable to afford the new rent. Marcus entered, followed by a grim-faced Mr. Galloway, a rare appearance from the typically absent owner. Emma trailed behind them, her usual poise replaced by tight-lipped tension. The sharp click of her heels against the tile floor punctuated the sudden hush that fell over the room. Mr. Galloway cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the quiet space. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I wanted to personally address the rumors you may have heard." He paused, surveying the room with the practiced gaze of someone unused to being challenged. "It's true that Galloway Properties has received an acquisition offer for this building. After careful consideration, we have decided to accept that offer." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Mrs. Robertson's hand flew to her mouth. "The transition to new ownership will occur over the next 30 days, Galloway continued. "Your current leases will be honored by the new management according to the terms of our sale agreement." "Who's buying the building?" someone called out. Galloway's jaw tightened. "The buyer is a partnership operating under Westbrook Financial. They've assured us they intend to maintain the building's character while making modest improvements." "What about the rent increases?" Mr. Patel asked, rising from his seat. "Will those still happen?" "That will be up to the new management," Marcus interjected, "though all existing lease terms must be honored." The concern in the room was palpable, vibrating in the stuffy air. These people had already endured months of uncertainty and manipulative management practices. Now they faced another unknown. The taste of their anxiety was familiar, bitter and metallic, like blood from a bitten cheek. As the meeting devolved into a barrage of questions that Marcus and the Galloways deflected with practiced non-answers, I remained silent, watching. Emma's gaze swept the room repeatedly, perhaps searching for signs of who might be connected to the mysterious buyers. Eventually, her eyes locked with mine. I offered a small, enigmatic smile, just enough to raise her suspicion, but not enough to confirm anything. She stared for a long moment before whispering something to her father, who glanced in my direction with a frown. After the meeting, I deliberately lingered, organizing papers in my bag as the room emptied. As expected, Emma approached, her perfume announcing her presence before she spoke. "Miss Chen," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I was surprised not to see you asking questions during the meeting." I looked up, feigning mild surprise. "I find it's often more informative to listen than to speak." "Indeed." She studied me, her head tilted slightly. "Our dinner conversation at Eloise's makes more sense now. You seemed very interested in real estate investment that night." I zipped my bag closed, the sound sharp in the nearly empty room. "It's become a passion of mine." "And your connection to Westbrook Financial? Is that just a coincidence?" I stood, meeting her gaze directly. "There are few coincidences in business, Miss Galloway. Mostly just opportunities recognized by some and missed by others." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you involved in this acquisition?" "Would it matter if I was?" I asked, my voice soft but steady. "The deal is done, from what I understand." Emma stepped closer, dropping all pretense. "Did you orchestrate this? Is this some kind of revenge because we sold your precious parking spot?" I laughed, the sound echoing in the empty room. "That would be quite an overreaction to a parking dispute, don't you think?" Her cheeks flushed with anger. "My father built this business from nothing. This building is our legacy." "Then perhaps he should have managed it with more consideration for the people who call it home," I replied, my voice hardening. "People like the Robertsons, who've lived here for 30 years and whom you were planning to force out." Her eyes widened slightly, confirmation that I'd overheard their conversation by the dumpsters months ago. "Business is business," she said, echoing her own words from that night. "The market dictates—" "Yes," I cut her off. "Business is business. And sometimes, Miss Galloway, the market corrects itself in unexpected ways." I walked past her toward the door, pausing briefly. "Oh, and you might want to speak with your maintenance staff about the mold in my apartment. It's become quite a problem." one the new owners will certainly want addressed before the acquisition closes. The look of impotent fury on her face as I left the room warmed me more than any summer sun ever could. The day of the ownership transfer arrived with a crystalline autumn clarity. The air felt charged with possibility as I dressed with particular care, a tailored charcoal suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. The silk blouse beneath it whispered against my skin as I fastened mother-of-pearl buttons, a subtle reminder of how far I'd come from the struggling tenant of my previous life. Marcus had scheduled yet another tenant meeting for that evening. The email announcement indicated the new ownership representatives would be present to discuss transition plans and building improvements. What it didn't mention, what no one except Diane and her partners knew, was exactly who would be representing the new ownership group. All day, I could barely contain the anticipation bubbling inside me. The phantom sensation of keys not yet in my possession seemed to weigh in my pocket. At precisely 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting, I met Diane in the building's service entrance. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, appraising my outfit with approval. I nodded, unable to suppress my smile. "I've been ready for this moment my entire second life." Diane raised an eyebrow but didn't question the odd phrasing. In the months we'd worked together, she'd come to respect my instincts and insights, even when she didn't fully understand their source. "The paperwork was filed this afternoon," she confirmed, handing me a leather portfolio embossed with the Westbrook logo. "Legally, the building is now ours, or more precisely, 15% yours." The portfolio felt substantial in my hands, the leather smooth and cool against my fingertips. Inside were copies of the deed transfer, management transition documents, and the building keys that would soon be officially mine. "The Galloways know the deal has closed, but they don't yet know about your involvement," Diane continued. "Marcus is expecting me and my associate to address the tenants." I checked my watch, an elegant timepiece I'd purchased to celebrate my Neurosite windfall. Let's not keep them waiting. We took the service elevator up to the community room level, the mechanical hum vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. The familiar scent of the building, a mixture of industrial cleaner and the faint mustiness that never quite went away, filled me with an odd nostalgia. Soon, even that would change under my management. The community room was already packed when we arrived through the side entrance. Marcus stood at the front, attempting to organize papers at the podium. Emma and her father sat rigidly in chairs to the side, their postures betraying their displeasure at this forced transition. Neither had spotted us yet. "Good evening, everyone," Marcus began, his voice strained as he tried to project his usual authority. "As you know, ownership of the building has officially transferred today to a partnership managed by Westbrook Financial. I'd like to introduce Miss Diane Westbrook, who will outline the transition plans." Diane moved forward confidently, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Thank you, Marcus. Yes, as of 4 p.m. today, the building formerly known as Galloway Tower is now Westbrook Tower, owned by a partnership of investors committed to ethical property management and community preservation." The room remained silent, residents watching warily. They'd heard promises before. "I'll be overseeing the transition period," Diane continued, but day-to-day management will be handled by my partner, who has a personal investment in this building's success." She turned toward me, extending her hand in invitation. "I'd like to introduce our managing partner for this property." The sharp click of my heels against the floor seemed to echo in the sudden silence as I walked to the front of the room. The stunned expressions on the faces of Marcus, Emma, and Mr. Galloway sent a thrill of satisfaction through me. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear and steady. "For those who don't know me, my name is Alexandra Chen. I'm a resident of Unit 512, and as of today, I'm also one of the owners of this building." The collective gasp that filled the room was everything I'd imagined it would be. Marcus's mouth literally fell open, his carefully maintained facade of competence crumbling visibly. Emma half rose from her chair, her face contorted with disbelief. "This is absurd," Mr. Galloway sputtered, standing abruptly. "She's a tenant, not a real estate investor." Diane smiled coolly. "Miss Chen is both, Mr. Galloway. She holds a significant equity stake in the ownership entity and brings valuable perspective as someone intimately familiar with the building's management history. I surveyed the room, meeting the bewildered gazes of my fellow residents, neighbors who had suffered under the Galloway's neglect just as I had. I want to assure everyone that your existing leases will be honored in full, I said. Additionally, all pending maintenance issues will be addressed within the next 2 weeks, starting with the most serious health and safety concerns. Mrs. Robertson raised a trembling hand. What about the rent increases? We can't afford what they were asking. I smiled gently at her. The rent adjustments announced by previous management exceed the terms of your original lease and will not be implemented. Your rent will return to the contracted amount, with only the standard annual adjustment as specified in your original agreement. The relief that washed over her face made all the months of planning worthwhile. Around the room, I could see similar expressions as the implications sank in. These weren't just tenants. They were a community, one I'd been part of in 2 lifetimes. This is outrageous, Emma interjected, stepping forward. You orchestrated this entire thing. You manipulated the situation. I turned to her calmly. Actually, Miss Galloway, I simply recognized an opportunity. A mismanaged property with significant unrealized value. Isn't that the essence of real estate investment? The stunned silence of the Galloways was punctuated by the first tentative applause from the back of the room. It spread gradually until most of the residents were clapping, their faces showing the first genuine hope I'd seen in months. After outlining our immediate plans for building improvements, Diane and I opened the floor for questions. The difference from previous tenant meetings was stark. Where fear and resignation had dominated, now there was cautious optimism. As the meeting wound down, I watched Marcus slip out a side door, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Emma and her father remained, however, approaching me as the room cleared. You won't get away with this, Mr. Galloway hissed, his face flushed with anger. You used insider information to undermine our business. I met his gaze steadily. I used my experiences as a tenant to identify a property with potential. Everything else was standard business practice, the same practices you employed when acquiring properties for your portfolio. Emma stepped closer, her perfume failing to mask the scent of her fury. This was never about business for you. This was personal. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But then, the best business decisions often are personal. They come from understanding what people truly need, rather than simply seeing them as sources of profit. Mr. Galloway seemed ready to continue arguing, but Emma placed a restraining hand on his arm. Come on, Father, there's nothing more to be done here. She gave me one last venomous glare. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Real estate is a small world. As they stalked out, Diane turned to me with raised eyebrows. That went about as expected. Better, actually, I replied. I thought Marcus might actually faint. She laughed, then grew serious. You know, when you first approached me with this idea, I thought you were just an angry tenant with delusions of grandeur. I've never been so glad to be proven wrong. I smiled, the weight of keys now actually in my pocket feeling like justice. Sometimes the most powerful moves are the ones no one sees coming. The meeting room emptied gradually, residents stopping to introduce themselves or share maintenance concerns. Many confessed they'd had no idea I was involved in the acquisition. The elderly couple, the Robertsons, approached last, Mrs. Robertson's eyes brimming with tears. We thought we'd have to leave, she said, her voice wavering. After 30 years, we had started packing our things. You don't have to go anywhere, I assured her, the lump in my throat surprising me with its intensity. This is your home. Mr. Robertson shook my hand firmly. Thank you, not just for us, but for everyone here. After they left, I stood alone in the empty meeting room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The rapid beating of my heart gradually slowed as the reality settled in. I'd done it. The building was mine. Partly mine, at least. The victory tasted sweeter than I'd ever imagined, like the first sip of expensive champagne after years of tap water. The next morning, I arrived at the management office early. The space smelled of fresh paint and new furniture, changes Diane had implemented immediately after the acquisition. Marcus had been given until the end of the week to clear out his personal belongings, but his desk already looked bare, cleaned out in haste after last night's revelation. I was reviewing maintenance reports when a knock at the open door interrupted me. Marcus stood there, his usual polished appearance notably diminished. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew. The overpowering cologne had been replaced by the sour scent of anxiety. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice lacking its usual condescension. "Do you have a moment?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Of course." He entered hesitantly as if stepping into a lion's den. "I wanted to discuss my position." "Your employment was terminated with the ownership transfer," I reminded him. "As detailed in the transition documents?" "I understand that," he said quickly, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. "But I was hoping we might reconsider. I have extensive experience managing this building, knowledge that could be valuable during the transition." I studied him, noting how his fingers trembled slightly as he clasped his hands in his lap. The same hands that had signed falsified lease documents and authorized maintenance accidents designed to drive me out. "You manage this building according to the Galloway's priorities," I said evenly. "Our management philosophy is fundamentally different." "I can adapt," he insisted, leaning forward. The desperation in his voice was palpable. "I know this building inside and out. The infrastructure, the systems, the residents' histories." "The same residents you were actively trying to force out?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. I was following directives, in a different role, under different leadership. "You would follow our directives instead?" I finished for him. "Even if those directives contradicted your personal financial interests?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I need this job, Miss Chen." The irony didn't escape me. How many times had vulnerable residents sat across from him, explaining why they needed more time to pay rent or pleading for proper maintenance? How many times had he dismissed them with the same cold efficiency the Galloways had encouraged? "I'm sorry, Marcus," I said, not feeling sorry at all. "We've already hired a new building manager, someone with a background in resident-centered property management. Your termination package is generous, more than the Galloways would have offered in a similar situation." I slid an envelope across the desk to him. The crisp paper made a soft sound against the polished wood. "Inside, you'll find your final paycheck, severance, and a reference letter for future employment opportunities, one that focuses on your administrative skills rather than your approach to tenant relations." His jaw tightened as he took the envelope, his fingers pressing into the paper hard enough to crease it. This is really about the parking space, isn't it? All of this because we gave that spot to Mr. Galloway's nephew a few times? I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. "This is about patterns of behavior, Marcus. The parking space was merely a symptom of a wider problem, prioritizing connections over contracts, power over people." No. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You won't last 6 months in property management with that attitude. This isn't a charity." "No," I agreed calmly. "It's a business. And businesses thrive when they honor their commitments and treat their customers with respect. Something the Galloways never understood." After he left, I sat back in my chair, processing the confrontation. In my previous life, Marcus had been the face of my helplessness, the smirking embodiment of a system stacked against ordinary people. Now he was simply a man without a job, scrambling to salvage his dignity. Later that afternoon, I was reviewing contractor bids for the mold remediation in several units, including my own, when Emma Galloway arrived without appointment. Unlike Marcus, she hadn't lost her polished exterior. If anything, she seemed even more carefully put together, armored in designer clothes and impeccable makeup. "Miss Chen," she said coolly, not waiting for an invitation to enter. "I think we should talk." I gestured to the chair Marcus had vacated earlier. "Please." She sat with practiced grace, crossing her legs at the ankle. "I'll be direct. My father and I would like to buy back the building." I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. "The building you just sold?" "We're prepared to offer a 20% premium over what you paid," she continued, ignoring my amusement. "A quick and substantial profit for you and your partners." I leaned back, studying her. The faint scent of her expensive perfume reminded me of our earlier confrontations. of standing in her shadow while she dismissed legitimate concerns. That's an interesting proposal, I said, but Westbrook Tower isn't for sale. 30%, she countered immediately. That's several million in profit for a building you've owned less than 48 hours. I shook my head. This isn't about the money, Miss Galloway. Her perfect composure cracked slightly, a flash of genuine confusion crossing her face. What else would it be about? Community, stability, keeping promises. I gestured to the maintenance reports on my desk. Creating a place where people can live without fearing their ceiling might collapse, or their rent might arbitrarily double. Emma's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Don't pretend this is some noble crusade. You orchestrated a hostile takeover. There was nothing hostile about it, I replied evenly. Your father willingly accepted our offer, an offer that was necessary only because you were attempting to circumvent tenant protections through manufactured maintenance issues and falsified lease terms. She waved this away as if swatting a fly. Business tactics. Everyone uses them. Not everyone, I corrected. And not here, not anymore. Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. What would it take? Name your price. Everyone has one. I smiled, the expression genuine this time. Not everyone, Miss Galloway. Some things aren't for sale. The sweet taste of this moment, of Emma Galloway reduced to pleading, was better than any dessert I'd ever savored. I'd imagined this scene during countless sleepless nights over the past months, but the reality exceeded my expectations. Emma stood abruptly. This isn't over. Actually, it is, I replied. The sale is final. The building is ours. The only thing left to discuss is whether your father might be interested in renting his old parking space. I believe it's still available at the standard monthly rate. The color drained from her face, replaced quickly by an angry flush that spread up her neck to her cheeks. You think you're so clever, don't you? A tenant playing at being a real estate mogul? Not a mogul, I corrected. Just a partner in a successful acquisition. One that benefits the community rather than exploiting it. As she turned to leave, her parting shot hung in the air. You'll regret making enemies of the Galloways. My father has connections throughout this city. And I have keys to this building, I countered. I know which I find more valuable at the moment. After she stormed out, I sat in the sudden silence, the satisfaction of the encounter washing over me in waves. The ownership transfer was complete. The Galloways' power over this building, and over me, was broken. In my previous life, they had driven me from my home, destabilizing my entire existence. In this life, I had turned the tables so completely they couldn't even comprehend what had happened. I picked up the master keys from the desk, the metal warm against my palm. They weren't just keys to apartments and utility rooms, they were keys to a future I was now free to shape. And that, more than any revenge, was the true victory. Over the next month, Westbrook Tower underwent a metamorphosis. The lobby, once characterized by worn carpeting and dated furniture, received a tasteful update that preserved its original character while adding modern touches. The harsh fluorescent lighting was replaced with warmer fixtures that cast a welcoming glow over the newly restored marble floors. The scent of fresh paint and polished wood replaced the lingering mustiness that had pervaded the common areas. True to my promise, all critical maintenance issues were addressed within 2 weeks. My own apartment's mold problem, intentionally neglected by the previous management, was remedied properly, with affected drywall removed and replaced rather than simply painted over. The musty smell that had become my constant companion gradually faded, replaced by the clean scent of new materials. The building's transformation wasn't limited to physical improvements. A new sense of community emerged as residents realized they no longer needed to fear arbitrary rent increases or retaliatory maintenance delays. The anxiety that had permeated hallway interactions dissipated, replaced by neighbors who actually greeted each other and stopped to chat. I maintained my apartment in Unit 512, though Diane had suggested I might want to combine 2 units for a more suitable owner's residence. This is my home, I told her. It has been through 2 lifetimes. She'd given me an odd look, but hadn't pushed further. Today marked exactly 1 month since the ownership transfer, and I'd scheduled a follow-up meeting with residents to discuss the next phase of improvements. I arrived early to the community room, the same space where I'd revealed myself as the new owner 4 weeks earlier. The room had been refreshed with new lighting, repaired ceiling tiles, and chairs that didn't wobble precariously when sat upon. As I arranged the presentation materials on the podium, smoothing the paper with deliberate motions, I heard the door open behind me. Turning, I found Mr. and Mrs. Robertson entering, followed by several other long-term residents. "We're not too early, are we?" Mrs. Robertson asked, her voice stronger than I remembered from our previous interactions. The constant stress of potential eviction had taken a physical toll that was now visibly receding. "Not at all," I assured her. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." More residents filed in, the chairs filling quickly. The atmosphere was markedly different from the tense, fearful meetings under Galloway management. Neighbors chatted amicably, some even bringing homemade cookies and coffee to share, something that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. At precisely 7 p.m., I called the meeting to order, the gentle tap of my pen against the microphone bringing conversations to a natural close. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "It's been 1 month since the ownership transition, and I wanted to provide an update on what we've accomplished and what's next." I outlined the completed maintenance projects, the updated security measures, and the infrastructure improvements that residents might not see but would benefit from. A new boiler system, electrical upgrades, and proper waterproofing for the garden-level units. "Next, I'd like to discuss our revised parking arrangement," I continued, feeling a particular satisfaction at this topic. "As many of you know, the previous management frequently reassigned reserved spaces based on preferences rather than contracts." A knowing murmur rippled through the crowd. "We've implemented a new system based on length of tenancy. Our longest-term residents now have the most convenient spaces, with adjustments made for documented accessibility needs." Mrs. Rodriguez, who used a walker and had previously been assigned a space far from the elevator, raised her hand. "My new spot is right by the entrance. It's made such a difference." I smiled, genuinely pleased by her feedback. That's exactly what we want to hear. As I moved through the agenda, the questions from residents were thoughtful and forward-looking, rather than defensive and fearful. When I opened the floor for general discussion, the suggestions reflected a community thinking about long-term improvements, rather than just surviving until their next lease renewal. After the meeting concluded, several residents lingered to speak with me personally. Mr. Patel, who had been one of the more vocal critics of the Galloway's management, approached with a tentative smile. "Miss Chen, the changes you've made, they're not what we expected." "What did you expect?" I asked curiously. He shrugged, slight embarrassment showing on his face. "When buildings change hands, it usually means higher rents, fewer services. We thought the Westbrook name meant luxury redevelopment, pricing us all out eventually." "That was the Galloway's plan," I acknowledged, "not ours." "Why the difference?" he pressed. "Business is business, as they like to say." I considered my answer carefully, the memory of my previous life informing my response. "Business is indeed business, Mr. Patel. But there are different ways to create value. The Galloways saw value only in extracting maximum profit from each unit, even if it meant constant tenant turnover. We see value in stability, in a building fully occupied by residents who take pride in their home and stay for years." He nodded thoughtfully. "It's working. For the first time in years, I've unpacked all my boxes. I stopped keeping them, in case we had to move suddenly." His confession touched me more deeply than he could know. In my previous life, I'd developed the same habit, living partially packed, always ready for the next crisis that would force me to leave. Later that evening, as I reviewed rental applications for recently vacated units, a knock at the management office door interrupted my concentration. Our new building manager, Teresa, poked her head in. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Chen, but there's someone here asking about a parking space. Says he has an arrangement with the previous owners." I looked up, the pen in my hand growing still. "Who is it?" "Mr. Galloway's nephew, the one with the red Corvette." A slow smile spread across my face. "Send him in, please." Moments later, a young man in his mid-20s sauntered into the office. I recognized him immediately, the entitled expression, the casual disregard for others evident in every movement. He'd never bothered to learn my name during the numerous times his car had occupied my assigned space. "Hey," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit. There seems to be some confusion about my parking situation. My spot's been reassigned or something? You must be Tyler, I said, setting my pen down deliberately. Mr. Galloway's nephew. He nodded impatiently. Yeah, and I always use spot 23B when I visit. But there's some Honda parked there now. That's because spot 23B is assigned to the resident of Unit 512, I explained calmly. As it always has been, according to the lease agreement. Look, my uncle had an arrangement with the building. I'm on the approved list or whatever. I opened a drawer and removed a folder, the paper inside crisped between my fingers as I extracted a document. I've reviewed all the previous management agreements. There is no approved list for reassigning contracted parking spaces to non-residents. His expression darkened. Do you know who my uncle is? Former owner of this building, I replied pleasantly. Current tenant of another property from what I understand. This clearly wasn't the response he expected. Just give me the spot. I'm only here for a few hours. I'm afraid that's not possible, I said, my tone polite but firm. Reserved spots are for residents only. However, we do have visitor parking on the lower level, available on a first-come, first-served basis. He leaned forward, his cologne, similar to Marcus's but even more overpowering, filling the space between us. Listen, I don't think you understand how things work. No, Tyler. I cut him off, my smile never wavering. I don't think you understand how things work now. This building operates according to the terms of legally binding agreements. Your uncle no longer owns this property, and his arrangements no longer apply. The smooth texture of the visitor parking pass felt satisfying against my fingers as I slid it across the desk toward him. You're welcome to use this for today. In the future, please check in with the front desk for visitor accommodation. He stared at the pass, then back at me, disbelief evident in his expression. My uncle will hear about this. I'm counting on it, I replied pleasantly. Please give him my regards. After he stormed out, I leaned back in my chair, a sense of completion washing over me. The cycle that had begun with that parking space, the first domino in a series of injustices that had destroyed my previous life, was now broken. The symmetry felt right, like a story coming full circle. The following day brought an unexpected visitor, Mr. Galloway himself, without his daughter's tempering presence. He entered the management office without knocking, his face flushed with indignation. You humiliated my nephew, he began without preamble. His voice elevated enough that I was certain Teresa could hear every word from her desk outside. I remained seated, my posture relaxed. I offered him visitor parking, which is our policy for all non-residents. That spot was always reserved for my family's use, he insisted, looming over my desk in what I supposed was meant to be an intimidating posture. Not according to any legal agreement, I replied evenly. The space was contractually assigned to Unit 512 in every lease signed by your company. His hands gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles whitening with pressure. This vendetta has gone far enough. First, you manipulate your way into ownership of my building, then you eliminate my management team, and now you're refusing basic courtesies to my family. I noted how he still referred to it as my building, unable to fully accept the reality of his loss. The woody scent of his expensive aftershave couldn't quite mask the sour smell of his desperation. Mr. Galloway, I said, rising slowly to meet his gaze. There's nothing personal about enforcing the terms of legal agreements. Your nephew has no contractual right to that parking space, just as you had no right to arbitrarily increase rents beyond the terms of tenant leases. His face reddened further. Is that what this is about? You orchestrated a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition because of a parking dispute and a standard market adjustment? This is about patterns of behavior, I replied calmly. Your company consistently prioritized profit over people, connections over contracts. That approach created vulnerability, a business opportunity for investors with a different vision. He scoffed, but I noticed the uncertain flicker in his eyes. And what exactly do you want now? Is this the part where you name your price to end this charade? There is no price, Mr. Galloway. No charade to end. I gestured to the office around us. This is simply business now. The ethical, sustainable management of a residential property. Everyone has a price, he insisted, echoing his daughter's words from weeks earlier. What's yours? The parking space? I'll trade you that spot in perpetuity for the building, back at a fair market value. The absurdity of his offer, trading a single parking space for an entire building, would have been amusing if it didn't so perfectly encapsulate his worldview. To him, everything could be bought, traded, or manipulated. It was simply a matter of leverage. The space is already mine, Mr. Galloway, I reminded him. As is the building. There's nothing to trade. He straightened, adjustment his suit jacket with a sharp tug. You think you've won, don't you? A nobody tenant playing developer. I'm not playing at anything, I replied. The deed transfer is complete, the financing secure. Your options are limited to accepting reality or continuing to waste your time and mine with these visits. After he left, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway, I sank back into my chair. The confrontation had been satisfying, yet I found myself wondering if this cycle of revenge and retribution would ever truly feel complete. The Galloways had been dethroned, their power over this building and its residents broken, but something still felt unfinished. That evening, I walked through the building, taking note of the improvements already in progress. The hallway carpets were being replaced, the walls freshly painted in warm, welcoming tones. The harsh fluorescent lighting had been swapped for softer fixtures that cast a gentle glow rather than the institutional harshness from before. As I passed the Robertsons' door, it opened to reveal Mrs. Robertson with a plate of freshly baked cookies. The sweet, buttery aroma instantly transported me back to childhood visits to my grandmother's house. Alexandra, I was just coming to find you, she said, her face brightening. Walter and I wanted to thank you properly for everything you've done. I accepted the plate, the warmth seeping through to my fingers. This is so thoughtful, but really not necessary. It is to us, she insisted. Do you know what we did yesterday? We hung pictures. For the first time in 2 years. I tilted my head questioningly. We stopped decorating when the rent increases started, she explained. We were always half-packed, you see, ready to go when we couldn't afford it anymore. Her eyes grew misty. But yesterday, Walter got out the hammer and we hung every single picture. We're home again. The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. In my focused pursuit of justice against the Galloways, I'd almost lost sight of what truly mattered. Not the revenge itself, but the restoration it enabled. These weren't just tenants, they were neighbors. A community that deserved stability and respect. I'm glad, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That's exactly what we wanted. After thanking her again for the cookies, I continued my rounds, seeing the building with fresh eyes. This wasn't just about righting the wrongs done to me in another lifetime. It was about creating something better for everyone who called these walls home. The next morning, I received an email notification of a certified letter awaiting signature. The heavy envelope crinkled as I signed for it, the paper thick and expensive beneath my fingers. Inside was a formal offer from Galloway Properties. Their third attempt to buy back the building, this time with a 40% premium over our purchase price. The letter concluded with a handwritten note from Emma. As a show of good faith, we're prepared to include permanent rights to your parking space, #23B, with a legal covenant ensuring it remains assigned to you regardless of future ownership changes. I couldn't help but laugh at their persistence and their continued failure to understand that this had evolved far beyond a dispute over a parking space. The letter found its way into my shredder, the mechanical whirring as it was reduced to strips oddly satisfying. Later that week, as I supervised the installation of the new security system in the lobby, I spotted a familiar red Corvette circling the building. Tyler Galloway, apparently still unwilling to accept the new reality, pulled into the fire lane and strode toward the entrance, keys dangling conspicuously from his hand. I met him in the lobby, blocking his path to the elevator. The new lighting cast flattering shadows across the restored marble floor, highlighting the tasteful updates that had transformed the space. Mr. Galloway, I greeted him, are you here to visit a resident? He smirked, jangling his keys. Just using my parking spot? You don't have a parking spot here, I reminded him. As I explained earlier this week, resident spaces are for residents only. He held up a key fob, one that I recognized as the old building access system we'd just replaced. My uncle gave me this. It's always worked before. The security system has been upgraded, I informed him. Old fobs no longer function. And as I mentioned, visitor parking is available on the lower level, provided you're visiting a specific resident who can authorize your access. His face clouded. My uncle owns this place. You can't keep me out. Your uncle sold this place, I corrected him. And yes, as the current owner, I absolutely can implement security measures that prevent unauthorized access. The security guard approached, alerted by our conversation. Everything okay here, Miss Chen? Mr. Galloway was just leaving, I said, not breaking eye contact with Tyler. Unless he'd like to register as a visitor to a specific apartment? The standoff lasted only moments before Tyler backed down, muttering under his breath as he turned toward the exit. The heavy glass door swung shut behind him with a satisfying thud, and I watched through the window as he stomped back to his Corvette, which now sported a parking violation sticker on the windshield. Should we call for a tow truck? The security guard asked. He's in the fire lane. I considered it briefly, the temptation to further enforce the consequences of the Galloway's entitlement strong. But something had shifted in me, a recognition that continuing this cycle of retribution would eventually make me indistinguishable from those I'd sought justice against. Give him 5 minutes, I decided. If he hasn't moved by then yes, follow the standard protocol. As I watched Tyler angrily scraping at the violation sticker, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The parking space that had started this entire journey, through 2 lifetimes, no longer held the emotional power it once had. It was just a space now, governed by fair rules applied equally to everyone. That evening, as I sat in my newly renovated apartment, I reflected on the path that had led me here. The mold was gone, the carpet replaced, the air fresh and clean. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled against the darkening sky, the same view I'd gazed at in despair during my previous life. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Final budget projections approved. Green light for Phase 2 improvements. Congratulations on a successful first month. I smiled, setting the phone aside. The revenge that had initially motivated me had transformed into something more meaningful, a vision for what ethical property management could look like. The Galloways had seen tenants as revenue streams to be maximized. I saw them as a community to be nurtured. Perhaps that was the true rebirth, not just returning with knowledge from a previous life, but evolving beyond the narrow focus of vengeance to create something genuinely better. 1 year after the acquisition of Westbrook Tower, I stood on my balcony, morning coffee in hand, surveying the transformed courtyard below. The once neglected space had been reimagined as a community garden with raised beds where residents grew vegetables and flowers. Small tables dotted the perimeter, creating spaces for neighbors to gather and converse. The sweet aroma of fresh pastries wafted up from the tenant cafe we'd opened on the ground floor, mixing with the earthy scent of newly planted herbs. The building itself had undergone a comprehensive renovation, but unlike the Galloways' planned luxury conversion, we'd focused on infrastructure, efficiency, and quality of life. New windows had reduced energy costs for all residents. Updated plumbing had eliminated the chronic leaks that had plagued certain tiers of apartments. The lobby now featured a comfortable seating area where neighbors lingered and chatted, rather than hurrying past each other. Most importantly, we'd kept our promise, honoring existing leases and limiting rent increases to the originally contracted terms. When units did turn over naturally, we priced the renovated apartments at the high end of the market rate, creating a financial model that satisfied both investors and residents. My coffee cup was warm against my palms as I leaned against the railing, observing the community I'd helped preserve and strengthen. The ceramic felt smooth and substantial, grounding me in this moment of quiet satisfaction. In my previous life, I'd been drinking instant coffee from chipped mugs at this point, struggling to make ends meet after being forced from this very building. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. I found Mrs. Robertson standing in the hallway, a small potted plant in her hands. "Good morning, Alexandra," she said cheerfully. "I brought you a housewarming gift, though I suppose it's more of a building warming at this point." I accepted the plant, its leaves vibrant and glossy in the morning light. "It's beautiful, thank you." "It's a peace lily," she explained. "They're excellent for improving air quality. I thought it might be symbolic of the changes you've made here." The simple sentiment touched me deeply. "That's very thoughtful. Would you like to come in for coffee?" She shook her head. Not today, dear. Walter and I are hosting the community breakfast downstairs. You'll join us, won't you? I wouldn't miss it, I promised. After she left, I placed the peace lily on my windowsill where it would catch the morning sun. The white flowers seemed to glow against the green leaves, an apt symbol indeed for the transformation that had taken place. Downstairs, the community room buzzed with activity. Tables had been arranged in a large circle, covered with colorful cloths and loaded with potluck breakfast items. The Robertsons had organized these monthly gatherings, which had quickly become a building tradition. Residents from all floors mingled, sharing food and conversation. Mr. Patel waved me over to where he stood with a group of neighbors I recognized from various floors. Miss Chen, we were just discussing the new laundry facilities. What a difference they've made. Please, after a year, I think you can all call me Alexandra, I reminded them, accepting a plate of fresh fruit from Mrs. Rodriguez. We were also talking about the rent stabilization proposal the city council is considering, added Miss Wilson from the fourth floor. Do you think it has a chance of passing? I hope so, I replied honestly. It would provide important protections for tenants in buildings without responsive ownership. Like we had before you took over, Mr. Roberts chimed in. Remember how we used to hide maintenance issues because we were afraid reporting them would lead to retaliation? Nods circulated through the group, along with murmurs of agreement. These shared memories of the Galloway era had become part of the building's collective history, challenges overcome together that strengthened the community bonds. Speaking of changes, Miss Wilson said, lowering her voice slightly, did you hear what happened to Marcus? I shook my head, genuinely curious. After his termination, I deliberately avoided keeping tabs on the former building manager, focusing instead on healing the damage his management approach had caused. He's working at the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown, she continued, as a valet parker, of all things. My sister stayed there last week and recognized him. The irony was impossible to miss. The man who had weaponized parking assignments as a form of control was now parking other people's cars for a living. In my previous life, I might have found this poetic justice deeply satisfying. Now I felt a more complex emotion, acknowledgement of the symmetry without the need to derive pleasure from another's downfall. Life takes unexpected turns for all of us, I said simply. After breakfast, I decided to walk the few blocks to the office I now shared with Diane and our expanding property management team. The crisp autumn air felt invigorating against my skin, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. The same streets I'd once walked in despair now felt like a path forward. As I approached the Grand Plaza Hotel that Miss Wilson had mentioned, I slowed my pace, curiosity getting the better of me. The circular driveway was busy with arriving guests and departing cars, valets in maroon uniforms rushing to accommodate the flow. And there he was, Marcus, opening the door of a luxury sedan for an elderly couple. His uniform was immaculate, his manner deferential. Without his desk to hide behind or the Galloway's authority to wield, he seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. The couple handed him their keys, and I watched as he carefully recorded the information before driving their car toward the parking structure. I continued past, unnoticed by my former adversary. There was no need to announce my presence or remind him of our shared history. His current circumstances weren't my doing. They were simply the natural consequence of his choices and the skills he'd cultivated. He'd been excellent at enforcing top-down authority, but had never developed the ability to build genuine relationships or solve problems collaboratively, limitations that would follow him to any workplace. At the next corner, I paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A red Corvette pulled up to the intersection, and for a moment, I thought it might be Tyler Galloway's. Instead, an unfamiliar woman was behind the wheel, talking animatedly on her phone. The car that had once symbolized everything wrong with the Galloway management style was just a car now. Expensive and showy, but stripped of its emotional significance in my life. The walk sign illuminated, and I crossed the street, my thoughts turning to the future. Our property management company had expanded beyond Westbrook Tower, acquiring 2 more buildings in neighborhoods facing similar pressures from luxury developers. In each case, we'd implemented our model of ethical management, preserving affordable units while selectively upgrading others, creating economically diverse communities rather than exclusive enclaves. When I reached our office, Diane was already reviewing the quarterly reports, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. There you are, she said, looking up as I entered. The numbers from Westbrook Tower are impressive. Occupancy at 98%, maintenance costs down 30% from our initial projections, and tenant satisfaction scores through the roof. I sat across from her, placing my bag on the floor beside me. What about the bottom line? She smiled, removing her glasses. That's the best part. Return on investment is 2% higher than we projected, even with the lower rental rates for legacy tenants. Turns out, not having to constantly clean and renovate apartments for new tenants saves significant operating costs. Which is what we've been saying all along, I noted. Stability benefits everyone. The Galloways never understood that, Diane said, shuffling the papers into a neat stack. And speaking of our friends the Galloways, have you seen the news? She slid a business journal across the desk. A small article near the back detailed how Galloway Properties had been forced to sell 2 more buildings after failing to secure financing for their planned luxury conversions. The economic model they'd built, leveraging properties to fund increasingly ambitious projects, had collapsed once lenders began questioning their management practices and tenant relations history. I can't say I'm surprised, I admitted, scanning the article. Their approach was fundamentally unsustainable. True, Diane agreed, but I wonder if they've learned anything from the experience. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a detour on my way home, passing by the building that had been Galloway Properties' headquarters. The signage had been removed, the windows dark. According to the article, they'd downsized to a much smaller office in a less prestigious location after their setbacks. I felt no triumph at this sight, only a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences. Businesses that exploit eventually collapse, and the wheel of fortune continues turning for everyone. When I returned to Westbrook Tower, I took a moment to appreciate the transformation of the entrance. The landscaping had been completely redesigned, with native plants that required less water and provided habitat for pollinators. The building's name was displayed in elegant, understated lettering rather than the ostentatious gold-plated sign the Galloways had installed. As I entered the parking garage, my headlights illuminated the neat rows of vehicles in their assigned spaces. I pulled into spot 23B, my space, as it had always been according to my lease. The personalized parking sign identifying it as reserved for Unit 512 gleamed under the improved garage lighting. Running my fingers along the sign, I felt the raised lettering, a small detail that symbolized respect for agreements and promised stability. This space, which had sparked an entire journey through 2 lifetimes, was now just one small element in a much larger story of transformation. As I headed toward the elevator, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from a car that had just entered the garage. Mr. Galloway himself, looking older and more subdued than when I'd last seen him. He hesitated when he spotted me, clearly surprised by the encounter. "Miss Chen," he acknowledged stiffly. "Mr. Galloway," I returned, "are you visiting someone in the building?" He nodded, the motion jerky and uncomfortable. "My sister moved in last month, apartment 310. I recognized the number immediately, the Robertsons' former apartment, which had become available when they downsized to a smaller unit on the same floor after Walter's mobility issues made the larger space impractical. "I see," I replied. "Mrs. Norwood is your sister? She's been a wonderful addition to the community." He seemed surprised by this information. "She says the building is different now, better maintained than when I owned it." The admission clearly cost him something to verbalize. His gaze drifted to the parking sign behind me, spot 23B, the space that had started everything. "We have an excellent maintenance team," I said simply, "and a management philosophy that prioritizes longevity over short-term profit." He shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, Elizabeth seems happy here." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with the unspoken history we shared. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I should go up. She's expecting me." I nodded. "Of course, the elevators are more reliable now. You won't have to wait long." As he walked away, I noticed something I hadn't initially seen. The slight stoop to his shoulders, the careful way he moved. The past year had aged him, the collapse of his business empire exacting a physical toll. I felt no pity, exactly, but perhaps a muted recognition of shared humanity. He had been ruthless in pursuit of profit. I had been equally determined in my pursuit of justice. We had both shaped this building's story, for better and worse. Back in my apartment, I made dinner and settled in for a quiet evening at home. The piece Lily Mrs. Robertson had given me caught the last rays of sunset through my window, its white flowers glowing against dark green leaves. The plant embodied everything we'd accomplished: cleaner air, new growth, transformation. I'd come full circle, from frustrated tenant to property owner, from victim of circumstance to architect of change. The journey that had begun with a sold parking spot had evolved into something I couldn't have imagined in either lifetime, not just revenge achieved, but a community preserved and strengthened. Outside my window, the courtyard lights illuminated residents enjoying the evening together. From my vantage point, I could see Mrs. Norwood, Mr. Galloway's sister, joining a group gathered around one of the tables, welcomed immediately into their conversation. Even here, in this small way, healing and connection continued. My phone chimed with a text from Diane. City Council passed the rent stabilization measure, celebration dinner tomorrow. I smiled as I replied with my agreement. The policy we'd advocated for would help protect other tenants across the city from experiencing what I'd endured in my previous life. My personal journey had expanded into systemic change, perhaps the most meaningful revenge of all. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the red Corvette that had once occupied my parking space, the falsified lease documents, the deliberately neglected maintenance issues, all weapons once used against me by those who saw housing as merely a profit center rather than people's homes. In my previous life, these injustices had destroyed me. In this one, they had motivated me to build something better, not just for myself, but for everyone who called this building home. I'd used my foreknowledge not only for personal gain, but to protect an entire community. The next morning, I drove to work, easily finding my reserved spot in the garage. As I walked toward the building entrance, I noticed Marcus across the street, still in his valet uniform, waiting at the bus stop. Our eyes met briefly, and I made a split-second decision. Crossing the street, I approached him directly. His expression shifted from surprise to wariness as I drew near. Miss Chen, he said cautiously, or should I say, Miss Building Owner. Alexandra is fine, I replied. How are you, Marcus? He hesitated, clearly trying to determine if there was some trick to my question. Getting by, he finally answered. The hotel work is different. I nodded, understanding the diplomatic understatement. I imagine it is. An awkward silence fell between us, the morning traffic providing background noise as we each calculated what to say next. Why this? He finally asked, gesturing vaguely toward Westbrook Tower. Of all the buildings in the city, why were you so determined to take that one? I considered my answer carefully. How could I explain that in another lifetime, I'd watched his callous management destroy not just my housing stability, but my entire economic foundation? That I'd returned with the knowledge needed to prevent history from repeating itself? Because it was home, I said simply, and because what was happening there, what you were helping to happen, was wrong. His gaze dropped to the sidewalk. It was just business. No, I corrected him gently. Homes are never just business. Not to the people who live in them. His bus approached and he moved toward the curb. Before boarding, he turned back to me. For what it's worth, your building looks good. Better than when we ran it. I smiled. That was the point. As his bus pulled away, I felt a weight I hadn't fully recognized lifting from my shoulders. The cycle was complete. The Galloways had fallen from power, Marcus had found a humbler path, and I, once the victim of their machinations, had created something sustainable and positive from the ruins of my previous life. I walked back across the street toward Westbrook Tower, my steps light on the familiar path. The morning sun caught the windows, reflecting back the blue of the sky and the green of the new landscaping. It was beautiful, this building that had once been the site of so much struggle. A resident exited just as I approached, holding the door open with a smile of recognition. Good morning, Alexandra. Good morning, I replied, stepping into the lobby that now truly felt like coming home. Not just for me, but for everyone who lived here. The revenge I'd sought had transformed into something far more valuable. Rebirth. Not just for myself, but for an entire community. I'd bought the building and tripled the rent, yes. but only for the luxury units that could bear it while preserving affordability for those who needed it most. In the elevator, I pressed the button for my floor, feeling the smooth operation that had replaced the jerky, uncertain ride of the Galloway era. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished metal, smiling, confident, at peace. The cycle that had begun with a sold parking spot had ended with the creation of something that would last far beyond any act of revenge. And that, I realized, was the truest victory of all.